I wonder if you took the trouble to go to the list of contributors of this conference. But if you would have done this, you would have noticed that there are only 2 or 3 people from secondary education. And guess what? I'm one. So this is my school. In fact, I'm a math teacher. And in the moment that I say this, you have a picture in your mind, because like a mother, everybody had a mother and a master, right? And these memories are built here, you know, in these classrooms, where you have students, and students who really don't want to be there. So, but somehow we make them to, we convince them, or we make them stay there. And that brings me to the topic of my, my presentation, which is motivation and how to improve it. Now, these guys don't have any problem with motivation. They really enjoy what they are doing. And don't you remember how wonderful it was to play with the sea and the sand, the fascination of that, and how challenging it was to build the highest sandcastle. On the other hand, you have these guys, and again, these people, these students are made to be there. And of course, immediately you recognize the 2 different kinds of motivation, right? Now, I was wondering, if you take an internet community, an e-learning community, and you would take a picture of it, how would this picture look like? And would you have the same problem as here, in the back of this class? So, in the beginning of the 80s, these 2 people, Edward Dacey and Richard Ryan, joined a discussion on motivation and how to enhance it. And basically what they said was, it is not the quantity of the motivation, but the quality of motivation matters. And from that, the self-determination theory came to in existence. And from there it went on into parenting, education, management, a lot of different areas of life. And especially John Marshall Reeves is the leading figure in the educational department, so to speak. The book I would like to advise on this is The Handbook of Self-Determination, which was written in 2002. So this theory became a kind of docking station for my experience. Okay, now, what is the problem really? And if you compare these 2 kinds of motivation, in my opinion, you run into a problem if you look at the external regulated behavior. The problem with, if you choose that route, is that the behavior often lacks maintenance, learning is superficial, and people feeling pressured. On the other hand, if you have intrinsic or more intrinsic motivated behavior, you have a freedom of choice, the maintenance of the behavior is better, and the learning as well. So it is really the quality of the motivation, in my point of view, that makes the difference. I want to show you 2 points from the self-determination theory. There are many more, but you know, I have only 50 minutes. And the first one is that these 2 poles are not a dipole, but in fact the end of a spectrum. And if I go, what in fact happens is, if I go from left to right, I keep on motivating people externally, but this motivation becomes more and more internalized. Difficult sentence. So, I'll give you an example. If I start at the left, you can motivate people by reward and punishment. And I use these kids as a metaphor for that, okay? A bit more internalized way of motivating people is through fear, through shame, things like that. And maybe this is a surprise for you, but I would use disco as a metaphor for that. Now, on the other hand of the spectrum, you have, of course, enjoyment, interest, challenge, and these guys are I think a good example for that. Now, going from left to right, at some point you pass a threshold. A threshold between perceived control behavior in the eyes of the people concerned. They feel that they are made do things, into autonomous behavior. They do it because they want to. And of course, immediately you see the gap. Now, apparently there is a kind of motivation which is external, but yet it is in harmony with the self. Because let's face it, life is hard, right? Not everything you have to do, you are intrinsically motivated, for instance, like paying taxes or going to the dentist, whatever. Now, how would this look like, this external yet in harmony with the self? I brought a picture for this. So, this is me. And what I'm doing here is I'm doing the timetable for our school. And if you look out the window, you see it's beautiful weather. In fact, it was during summer holiday. You know, others were on vacation or having a cup of coffee or cappuccino in Karlsruhe. And yet I was here making the timetable. And at the same time, although it was externally regulated, I was in harmony with myself. I think that's obvious. And that brings me to the second part. How could you move people more in the intrinsic direction? And to do that, you have to take into account 3 basic needs. Okay? And the first basic need is relatedness. If you have a relationship with your students, or if you're a manager and you have a relationship with the people working for you, it helps them to be motivated for work. And another thing is, of course, people need to feel competent. They need to have the feeling that they are up to the task. However, if you have only these 2 needs, it brings you only so far. And again, I use this girl as a metaphor for that. Because the third need is maybe a surprise. Because the third need is autonomy. Now, autonomy is a difficult word, because everybody thinks of autonomy that you can do whatever you want. On the other hand, if you want to motivate people, and you can't regulate that, you can't say, be motivated. So, if you try to regulate externally, it kills intrinsic motivation. Whereas if you have these 3 components together, you are moving more to the realm of autonomous behavior. And I think of a working e-community. You always see that these 3 components play a role there. Okay? Now, how does it show in practice? And I took simply some examples from my own experience. Okay? So, for instance, how would a teacher look like if you compare a controlling teaching style with an autonomous teaching style? The controlling teaching style is using controlling language. Now, I don't have to smile. I can't smile if I do this, because otherwise it won't look like good. But you know, you have a teacher and say, okay, tomorrow we have a test. And then John raises his hand and said, sir, I have a football tournament, I can't study. And then the teacher says, boy, where are your priorities? You know, you give the students a feel of guilt or shame. You're using marks as punishing. On the other hand, autonomy supporting style is not giving people a complete freedom. Not at all. It is giving them structure, but within the structure, you're giving them options. They can choose. And if it goes wrong, you empathize with them, so to encourage them. We pay so much attention to grading our students, whereas I think that encouraging them might be just as important. Now, how about homework? What I do with my students, I give them this. On the left you see the date, and they know 2 weeks in advance they will have a test. And the work they have to do for this test is this. Now some of them might have the need for extra exercise, so they can do these exercises. And some are very quickly, and they have some extra work. Which means that every student has his private, his own learning route. Everybody does this. Some take some examples or some exercises from this column, and maybe some others do this. And of course you can also do this and translate this to an e-learning situation, I suppose. Checking students' progress is of course in e-learning even more easy than here. I use a sheet. And grading group work is also a very powerful tool. What I do is this: I give every group a card. And on this card they have to answer every lesson a question. Like, for instance, what was your conclusion of this lesson, or what did you learn of this? Things like that. And they decide among themselves what the homework will be based on the planner, of course. You know, you have structure and you have options. And I grade that. You know, instead of giving a mark from 1 to 10, so 1 being very low and 10 very high, they can earn a 9 for the test, and the last is then comes from the card. Now, even in an e-learning community, I think if you show how the participation of students in a blog or in a chat or whatever, if you make it visible, I think you could encourage people to take part. Now, there's one thing my students particularly liked, and I brought you something, and it's this. It is a pen, and this pen has a little camera. So it registers what you write. And it does not only register what you write, it also registers what you say. Okay? And you already mentioned from fascination to Facebook. This is my Facebook site. And what my students can see is this. I hope the sound is on. No, no sound. Normally they would hear me speaking. Can I do something about this? Okay, I'll leave it. And they hear my voice, my jokes, you know, funny. And as the drawing or whatever you want to explain progresses, I can explain what I'm doing at the same time. And here you see the difference also between students. There are students who go very fast through this sheet and understand them and go on. Others decide they want to hear a part. Others decide they want to hear it twice. And with every decision they make what to hear, they decide what they want to learn. And that's exactly the kind of motivation I'm aiming for. Now, so in the end, what my proposal would be, what my suggestion would be, is to try to move your students toward a more internally regulated, more intrinsic motivated behavior. And you need 3 things for that, which is relatedness, competence, and above all, autonomy. Thank you very much. This is my email address. Write me if you want.